What if I told you that a single torn blanket would expose one of the most calculated deceptions in Canadian criminal history? That the very fabric meant to comfort a 6-year-old girl named Lilly would become the thread that unraveled a conspiracy so shocking it would change how we view missing children cases forever? 30 minutes ago, the RCMP announced criminal charges in the disappearance of Lilly and Jack Sullivan. But this isn't the ending you might expect. This is the beginning of a story so twisted, so methodically planned, that it will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about family, trust, and the lengths someone will go to hide the truth. If you're ready to dive deep into a case that has investigators saying this was never about lost children wandering into the woods, but about something far more sinister, hit that subscribe button now. Because what I'm about to tell you will change how you see this case completely. It was May 2nd in rural Nova Scotia when the call came in. 2 children, Lilly Sullivan, age 6, and her little brother Jack, age 4, had vanished without a trace. The dense woods of Pictou County stretched endlessly in every direction, swallowing up search parties like the morning fog that clung to the treeline. But here's what made investigators' blood run cold from day one. In a forest where every broken twig should tell a story, where every footprint should leave evidence, there was nothing. No torn clothing caught on branches. No dropped toys. No footprints in the soft earth. It was as if 2 children had simply evaporated into thin air. The search effort was massive. Helicopters circled overhead, their rotors beating against the silence. Drone operators swept grid after grid, their cameras scanning for any splash of color that might be a child's jacket or backpack. Trained search and rescue teams with decades of experience combed through underbrush so thick you could barely see 5 feet ahead. Days turned into weeks. The community rallied like I've rarely seen. Volunteers poured in from across the maritime provinces. They searched from dawn until dusk, calling out Lilly, Jack, until their voices were raw. Local businesses donated food and supplies. Churches organized prayer vigils. Social media exploded with shared posts and desperate pleas. But with each passing day, the same haunting result: nothing. That's when one investigator made a comment that would prove more prophetic than anyone realized. He said, "If this is not a criminal investigation now, I'd be totally surprised. We can't find any evidence, not a backpack, not a shoe, nothing. We can't find the kids." When you can't find them, somebody has to say enough is enough with searching those areas. So now we move to where? There's only one other option, a nefarious take to this. Those words hung in the air like a death sentence. Because what he was suggesting went against every parent's worst nightmare and every investigator's hope. He was suggesting that maybe, just maybe, these children hadn't wandered off at all. The family spokesperson during this agonizing time was Molly Kia Brooks Murray, the children's mother. Day after day, she appeared on local television, her eyes red-rimmed with tears, pleading for her babies to come home. She organized search parties, coordinated with media, and became the public face of a mother's worst nightmare. "Please," she would say, her voice breaking, "if anyone has seen them, if anyone knows anything, please come forward. They're just babies. Lilly loves her pink blanket, and Jack carries his little stuffed animal everywhere. They must be so scared." The community's heart broke for her. Here was a mother living every parent's deepest fear, and she was handling it with such grace, such determination. She never gave up hope, never stopped fighting for her children. But sometimes, the most convincing performances are the most dangerous ones. The breakthrough came in the most unexpected way. It wasn't a witness coming forward or a piece of clothing spotted by a search team. It was something much more intimate, much more personal. It was Lilly's pink blanket, the one her mother had mentioned so many times in her tearful pleas. The blanket that would change everything. What investigators found would turn this missing persons case into something far darker. Something that would reveal how a mother's love could be twisted into the most calculated deception imaginable. And the evidence they uncovered would be so shocking, so methodical, that even seasoned investigators would struggle to comprehend the level of planning involved. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. To understand how a pink blanket became the key to solving this case, We need to understand what investigators found when they started looking beyond the obvious, beyond the tears, beyond the desperate pleas for help. We need to understand that sometimes the person standing in front of the cameras begging for answers already knows exactly where those answers lead. The first real clue came from the most unlikely place, the Sullivan family's own trash bin. It was a search volunteer, someone who had spent weeks combing through the wilderness, who noticed something odd. Buried among the household garbage was a piece of fabric. Pink fabric. Torn fabric. At first glance, it seemed insignificant. Families throw away damaged clothing all the time. But this volunteer had heard Molly's pleas about Lily's beloved pink blanket dozens of times. Something about finding a piece of pink fabric in the family's own trash, while the little girl who loved that blanket was still missing, felt wrong. The volunteer reported the find, and investigators carefully extracted what turned out to be roughly half of a child's blanket. The edges were jagged, clearly torn rather than cut. But here's where the story takes its first shocking turn, because this was only half the blanket. The other half was found 7 kilometers away, snagged on branches along a remote ATV trail that wound deep into the Nova Scotia wilderness. 7 kilometers. That's not a distance a blanket travels by accident. That's not a distance a scared 6-year-old girl drops pieces of her comfort blanket while wandering through the woods. That's a distance someone travels deliberately. When DNA analysis confirmed that both pieces belonged to Lily's blanket, everything changed. This wasn't evidence of children getting lost. This was evidence of someone creating a trail. Someone who knew exactly where they were going and exactly what story they wanted to tell. But investigators needed more than a torn blanket to build a case. They needed to understand how that blanket traveled 7 kilometers from a family trash bin to a remote trail. They needed to understand who had access to both locations and the means to travel between them. That's when they started digging into ATV rental records from the area. What they found was chilling in its precision. On May 1st, the night before the children were reported missing, someone had rented an ATV from a local outfitter. The rental agreement was time-stamped at 9:30 p.m., and the vehicle was returned before dawn the next morning. The rental trail logs showed exactly where that ATV had traveled, and guess what trail appeared on those logs? The exact same remote trail where the second piece of Lily's blanket was found. But here's what made investigators' hands shake as they reviewed the evidence. Cell tower data showed that ATV had idled in that remote location for exactly 45 minutes. 45 minutes. That's not someone taking a scenic ride through the woods. That's someone who stopped, got off the vehicle, did something very specific, and got back on. That's someone who had 45 minutes to walk into the woods, place a piece of torn blanket on the branches, and walk back to their vehicle. The cell tower data didn't stop there. Those same towers that tracked the ATV also tracked every cell phone in the area that night. And one specific phone, pinged a tower just 20 minutes away from that remote trail at exactly midnight. The phone belonged to Molly Kia Brooks Murray. Now, this might not seem significant at first. After all, Molly lived in the area. Her phone pinging local towers wouldn't normally raise any red flags. But Molly had told investigators, told the media, told anyone who would listen, that she had been out of province that entire evening. She had alibis, she had claimed. She had been visiting family hours away from where her children would disappear. But cell towers don't lie. When investigators confronted Molly with this digital evidence, they watched something that would haunt them for months afterward. They watched a mother's story begin to unravel in real time. There were no flight manifests with her name. No hotel receipts from the location she claimed to have visited. No witnesses who could verify her presence anywhere but exactly where her cell phone said she was, 20 minutes away from where her daughter's blanket would be found. The story she had been telling, the alibi she had been clinging to, was crumbling with each digital breadcrumb investigators followed. But the RCMP didn't stop with cell phone records. They moved quickly to secure Molly's rental car, the vehicle she had been driving during the time period in question. What they found in that trunk would provide physical evidence that would be impossible to explain away as coincidence. First, there was a single pink sock, small enough to belong to a 6-year-old girl. But this wasn't a clean sock that had fallen out of a laundry basket. This sock was caked with woodland debris, leaves, dirt, pine needles, the kind of organic matter you'd find deep in the forest, far from any walking trail. Then there was a granola bar, half-eaten, with small teeth marks still visible in the remaining portion. When DNA testing came back, those teeth marks matched Jack Sullivan's dental impression perfectly. And finally, perhaps most damning of all, there was a tuft of blonde hair. Not just any blonde hair, but hair that was entwined with pink fibers that matched exactly the fabric composition of Lilly's torn blanket. Independent forensic experts would later testify that this combination of evidence, the sock, the granola bar, the hair, and fibers, could not have occurred through accidental transfer. The debris patterns, the way the hair was entwined with fabric fibers, the positioning of items in the trunk, all of it pointed to deliberate placement. Someone had put these items in that trunk. Someone who had access to both children and their belongings. Someone who had been in close contact with them on or around May 2nd. Someone who had been lying about where they were that night. As investigators pieced together this physical evidence, they realized they weren't just looking at a case of missing children anymore. They were looking at a carefully constructed deception that had been planned well in advance. The ATV rental the night before. The strategic placement of blanket pieces to create a false trail. The disposal of evidence in a family trash bin where it might never be found. This wasn't the panicked reaction of someone who had lost track of their children. This was the methodical execution of a plan that had been thought through, prepared for, and carried out with chilling precision. But investigators suspected there was more to this story. The level of planning, the coordination required to execute such a deception, it suggested that Molly hadn't been working alone. And they were right. Hidden in digital files that Molly thought had been permanently deleted, investigators would find evidence of conversations, recordings, and planning sessions that would reveal the true scope of this conspiracy. Evidence that would show just how far someone was willing to go to make 2 children disappear. Evidence that would answer the question that had been haunting investigators from day one. If these children hadn't simply wandered off, then where were they now? While physical evidence was mounting against Molly Brooks Murray, investigators knew they needed more than torn blankets and trunk contents to understand what had really happened to Lilly and Jack Sullivan. They needed to get inside the mind of someone capable of orchestrating such an elaborate deception. That breakthrough came from an unexpected source, Molly's own digital footprint. When RCMP cybercrime units obtained legal warrants for cloud backups and digital storage accounts, they discovered that Molly had been far more active online than anyone realized. Hidden in encrypted apps and deleted file folders, investigators found a digital trail that would chill them to their core. The most damning evidence came in the form of voice memo files that had been recorded on an encrypted messaging app. These weren't casual voice messages sent to friends or family. These were something far more sinister. They were practice runs. The files contained multiple recordings of the same phrases, spoken over and over again, each take slightly different from the last. Once they're gone, nobody will search here again, Molly's voice said in one recording. In another, keep them quiet until help arrives. Audio specialists brought in to analyze these recordings confirmed what investigators suspected. These weren't spontaneous thoughts being recorded. These were rehearsed lines. Each successive recording showed more control, less emotion, more calculated delivery. They were the audio equivalent of an actor practicing their lines before a performance. But perhaps most disturbing were the timestamps on these files. They had been recorded days before May 2nd. Days before the children were officially reported missing. This wasn't someone reacting to a crisis. This was someone preparing for one. The implications were staggering. These recordings suggested that whatever happened to Lilly and Jack Sullivan had been planned well in advance. Someone had sat alone, possibly in their car or in their home, practicing what they would say when the time came to execute their plan. But investigators discovered that Molly hadn't been practicing alone. The breakthrough that would expose the full scope of the conspiracy came from an anonymous source. Someone somewhere in the community had been listening, and they had been recording. USB drives began appearing at RCMP detachments across Nova Scotia. No return address, no identifying information, just anonymous packages containing high-quality audio files. The audio had been captured by smart home devices, the kind of always listening technology that most people forget is constantly recording the sounds around them. If you're someone who believes children deserve justice, who thinks the truth matters more than protecting lies, then you need to subscribe right now. Because if you won't stand up for missing children by hitting that subscribe button, then honestly, what will you stand up for? And if you're not going to subscribe, at least have the courage to tell us why in the comments.